Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 42 of Two Amazon Sellers and a Microphone. Today, Chris and I have a very special guest. Sajag Agarwal from Movley is on with us. What's happening? How are you?
I'm good. I hope you guys have been good too. Enjoyed the
Yeah,
things.
we're hanging in there.
yeah, we've been good. You were telling us that you're down there in LA right now. How's
Yeah.
everything there?
Yeah, it's been good. So normally based out of Chicago, but LA weather is pretty good and right next to everybody as well. So love to come down here in the winters and just kind of hang out.
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably going to snow here tomorrow in Kansas City. So we're a little jealous of your LA weather. But hey,
come down.
well, we're excited to have you. This is going to be a lot of fun to talk about Movley and what you do with inspections. I know this is going to be great for the people that listen. I mean, this is something that gets overlooked a lot, I think, when people are starting to sell, or even, we'll dive into it all, just existing sellers, mistakes they're making in this regard. Before we dive in, though, you just want to tell us your story. Give us your background. What brought you into this space? How you got started just in the Amazon world, and then what made you take the leap starting your own company?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually got into Amazon by accident. So I was out shopping with my mom, and you know how long girls take when they're out shopping. It just takes hours and hours.
Oh my gosh, forever.
Exactly. So I was just sitting around. I was bored out of my mind. I was on the phone, and I needed an iPhone charger because my cable just broke. So I went on eBay, and I was just bored around. So I was fiddling with the filters and things like that. And I happened to do sort high to low instead of low to high. And I found out I could buy like 100 of these cables for like $100. And then when I did low to high, these same cables were selling for $7 a piece. So I was like, all right, well, this is too easy. And I was like, all right, well, I did some, napkin calculations, and then I was like, all right, whatever. And I went ahead and bought the 100 units. And then I actually sold those on eBay, and I flipped those in about 2 weeks, sold all 100. And was just able to multiply my money. So then I put some more money back, and I started trading a bunch of stuff on eBay. But what ended up happening is that I was just basically kind of selling trash, to be honest. I wasn't too happy about the quality of the products, and it was not like something I can go to people and say, yeah, I flip cables on eBay, and that's my career choice. So I was like, all right, you know what? I need to kind of make this more legitimate. So then I started looking into okay, how can I start my own brand? And I went into cables first, electronics. That was my first brand on Amazon. And I started that out, and it worked out really well. So we actually custom engineered all of our products. So we worked with the factories hand in hand, did a lot of customizations, and I ended up starting that brand. And that brand, we started originally on eBay, but I kind of knew eBay was not going to give us a lot of volumes because we were tapping out on the top keywords for a lot of our products and only getting 20, 30, 40 sales a day. With my eBay business. So I looked into Amazon, and I was like, oh, okay, here, we have some volume here. And I went on Amazon, started selling my products there, and we started growing really fast. So actually our first year we did 40K, second year we did $1 million. And on our third year, we were on track to do about 2 million that year. But what ended up happening is we started having some extreme quality control problems. So some of our new suppliers, we were having quality control problems from the get-go. Some of our old suppliers, after 1.5, 2 years of working together, we started having a lot of quality control problems, customer reviews coming in. We went from a 4.9 star product, one of the best rated products in the industry for our top seller, to about 3.8. So it was a pretty steep decline. And what ended up happening is I moved to Shenzhen, China, and I lived there for 6 months. And I basically watched my own inspectors mess up my products. I did my own inspections. I hired my own in-house team in Shenzhen, which actually ended up taking bribes from our suppliers themselves. So it just became this crazy situation and just went downhill. And that's actually how I got into Movley right now. And my goal with Movley is essentially, how can I streamline the process for manufacturing as much as possible without being the middleman? And we started with quality control inspections just because that was kind of the biggest thing that killed my brand. And we saw a lot of value there. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
One thing, you moved to China. I mean, that's not an easy decision to make. What happened there? Why all of a sudden, I'm going to leave and go? Is it because the quality was getting poor, or what was that like?
Yeah, so when you're working with Chinese manufacturers, it's just really hard to like know what's happening. Like we were always having difficulties, problems, coordination problems, things like that. We hired and we had some in-house people working on the ground, but they just were not able to manage things. And then we were still getting these past inspections, getting defective products, and our lead time for our bestseller product was actually about 2 to 3 months. So after you factor in about a month for shipping, a month for selling, we're talking like a 4 to 5 month turnaround time, which is a ton of time. So when we started finding out we had quality control problems, I had like 5 months of inventory stacked up at once. So I knew like if I was not going to fix this properly, my minimum hit I'm taking is like 5 months, and my maximum hit could be years. If it takes like 3 or 4 months to fix this. So that's when the alarm bells started going off, and I was like, okay, hey, I really need to figure out what's going on here. And I don't think there's any way I can do it better than if I was there myself. And
Wow. That's an amazing story. I mean, I'm still blown away that you just decided to go to China and move there. But I think that you did it because you were trying to better your business. You had to find out what was going on. I think a lot of us as sellers, we just treat that as a part of the process. We order from our supplier, they ship it to us, and we don't treat it as if there's a lot of areas to be more efficient, better, more productive, better in that regard there, or how we can save ourselves money and like you're talking about quality control issues. I've had products where it's been a successful product for a long time, dealt with the same supplier, decided to start negotiating the price. And because I did that, they changed the materials on me and changed the quality. And I don't know that if I'm not getting inspected. I thought I had a level of trust there from partnering for a long time. And so I didn't continue the inspections. And now, I've got stuff going straight to FBA that's getting bad reviews. So I can see just the leap that you took to do that. And so at that point, you're in China. And then is that where you decided to just launch your own company, launch Movley and go with it?
Yeah, kind of. So when I was in China, I was basically doing my own inspections regardless, because I was like, hey, I need to check my products. And I actually watched my own inspectors. I hired a pretty large multinational company that came to the factory while I was there. And I literally watched them completely botch up my inspection. I did the same inspection myself with everything I told them. It took me 9 hours. I thought an inspector was going to take 12 hours for that. And the inspector went to the factory. The company told me, yeah, we can do it in 8 hours. And I was skeptical. I was like, all right, whatever, we'll see what he does. And I showed up and I was waiting there for 5 hours. The guy showed up 5 hours late to an 8-hour inspection, and then proceeded to basically just visually check all the products. So we asked him to, do some product tests, take a look at the products, make sure it works, regardless of what product you have, even if it's like a cup, like a paper cup, or if it's like electronics, you need to have some product tests to make sure the products work, cup's not leaking, things like that. And, so I gave him product tests to do. He just did that on 2 to 3 units. And that's about it. So when we got the report the next day, it was a passed inspection. And that was kind of the experience that I had when I was like, is this like for real? Like, is this like actually what's going on here? And then I went ahead and I started I brought in my own team in China. So I hired a team out of Shenzhen. We opened an office in Nanshan. And we had a couple of full-time people, and we were doing our own inspections and things like that. And I was training them. But what ended up happening is that they didn't really do a proper job because they started building too close relationships with their suppliers. And what ended up happening is our suppliers were basically, able to get past bad products. This guy would go to the factory, would not even check the products like we asked him to. For like our primary person. So at that point, I moved back to Chicago because, at that time I was kind of in that dreamland, like, okay, hey, we got our own team, we got our own people, everything should be good now. And I moved back to Chicago, and I was still having some problems after I left. All of a sudden, came back up. So at that point, after that area, basically I had to shut that company down because I was like, all right, hey, this is not going to work out. I have way too many, too many units of bad products here, and it's just not going to work out. So at that point, that's when I said, okay, hey, what can I do to help other people not have the same issue? And that's when I went in and I started working on Movley to figure out, okay, what can I do to improve this process?
Nice. I like that story. That's crazy. I've done inspections, and I've got to the point now where I just use a different person each time because I was fearful that, like, the second time that the company went back, it was just going to be a quick glance. And I didn't want them to create a relationship with my supplier because I didn't want them to be like, oh, yeah, we're good to go and go on and move on without it. So whenever we talk to sellers, where it's like, make sure you get an inspection, but keep your supplier on their toes. Get somebody else in there, and then hire somebody else the second time. Change it up on them, because you don't want that that bribery, like you mentioned. You don't want that to obviously happen. So while we're in China, is there anything like a good funny story or anything that like you remember about being there? Maybe the good things, not so much the bad things, but anything good over there?
Yeah, definitely a funny story. So the first time I went there, I didn't want to go myself. So I was actually talking to my mom, and she was like, you know what? So my uncle is based out of India, and so he actually he works with factory himself. He runs like an apparel manufacturer, like they do like clothes and fabrics. So he has some familiarity with factories and things like that. So my mom was like, all right, you know what? If you're going to go to China and you're going to live there, like for your first month, maybe you should have like somebody there, like family to be with. And she called my uncle, and my uncle was like, yeah, you know what? I'm down to come. Okay. Now my uncle is like 40, 50 years old. He's an old guy. I'm a young guy. All right. So we went to these factories, and he would always kind of shadow me. He'd be there. I'd be like doing everything, talking with these factories, building the relationship, but he'd just kind of be in the background. So every time we went to the factory, they always thought like he was the boss and like I was like his employee. And even though I was like kind of doing everything. So at one point we went to this one supplier, and they really wanted our business. So at the end of our like discussion, they were like, okay, let's go out for dinner or whatever. And our sales rep actually went and got like every single girl in the office to come out with us. And then they were all crowding around my uncle, and everyone was talking to me. So we were in this restaurant. Yeah, my uncle's sitting here. He's got like these 3 girls on him. I was like taking videos secretly. I was like, these are some great photos. I'm going to send it to everybody on the family group chat. Look what's happening down here. And my uncle's just here, and these 3 girls are like crowding around him, and I'm just kind of chilling. So I guess that's a pretty funny story.
I'm sure your uncle loved it. He's like, hey, thanks for bringing me.
You didn't want to look at like a little bit for the photos.
Yeah. Gosh, that's awesome. Those
yeah,
a great story. I love it. That's just fun that you just took that on. And I mean, great advice by your mom. Take someone with you to make it more comfortable. And yeah, it was perfect. You got to play him off as the bigwig, and you were his employee. That's a perfect way to do it. Well, we were talking a little. We'll transition out and talking a lot about the inspections now and the inspection process. But we were talking before we went live here, just about how one bad order, one order that you make, maybe make a $3,000 order of a product, and it comes back with bad quality, could pay for years and years of inspections if you'd have just done it right the first time.
Yeah.
Expand on what you mean by that.
Definitely. So we did like a really simple calculation just a few weeks ago, and when we were working on revising our marketing messaging. And what we actually found out is if you have about $3,000 of defective products, that alone is enough to pay for about 10 inspections. But when you factor in like the product cost, the freight, the packaging, the shipping to the customer, if the customer returns the product, you might have an FBA administrative fee, you might have other costs involved. And then you add in all those different costs, the warranty claims, the customer support. And I'm not even talking like $20 an hour customer support. I'm talking like $5, $7 in the Philippines. Like you start adding in all those expenses for warranty replacements, returns, not even including brand damage, negative reviews, or re-ranking your product, stuff like that. You can essentially, with about $3,000 of defective goods, by adding in all those additional costs, you can pay for all your inspections for about 7 years if you do them quarterly, which is absolutely ginormous. And that bad order can happen anytime. So like in my case, like we had it happening on the first order, on the second order, also, on the 10th order or the 15th order, just randomly, 2 years down the line. So whenever that order hits, that one bad order, that's enough, on a very small order to pay for all your inspections for several years. So if you don't do your inspections right and you don't have that in your process, when something goes wrong, like in my case, it can just wipe you out, when you're cash tight and, you're putting all your money in a couple of orders.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just that's a lot to bring in there. One thing that I wanted to touch on is when do you think that sellers should be doing these inspections? Like, we're negotiating with our suppliers back and forth. We get those products ready to roll and ready to ship. What volume does a seller need to be at, or what volume does a seller need to be ordering for an inspection to make sense? Because some people are ordering like 500 units, and they may not have the funds to do the inspection, or they may not have the time. They're ready to get rolling. Is there a specific volume that a seller needs to be at before they do inspections?
I mean, to an extent, yes. If you're doing like a very, very small order, we're talking like maybe under $1,000, then it may not be worth it. But anytime you're getting into above $1,000, I would say it's worth it. And it depends on how much money you're putting at risk, especially as well. Because if you're starting a brand, and let's say you're putting, your product cost, your startup cost is like $5,000, and 3,000 of that dollar goes to, inventory. That inventory, that $3,000 of inventory is bad. You've lost not just $3,000. You have to start over from scratch, and you've lost several $1,000s. So I guess it really depends on the volume. When you have like all your eggs in one basket, which is just, one or two products, your risk is much, much higher. So in that case, for small sellers, inspections are even more important than for large sellers. But for large sellers, the financial impact of one bad order is so much higher that it also balances out. So I wouldn't say there's really a threshold to start doing inspections, unless you're doing an order that, is like under 500, maybe $1,000, where it just absolutely does not make sense to do an inspection because it's more of a test order and you're more of just checking the products, and, you're maybe not using it to sell on Amazon. That's when it might make more sense not to do an inspection.
That's interesting how you brought up, and it's not just the product cost that you're out. And it makes total sense. I mean, if you've got an order coming in, now you're invested in images, you've spent a lot of time on your listing, you spent a lot of time on marketing your product to generate those sales, and now you've got a product that's got a bunch of bad reviews. So you're out a lot more, not to mention just the product cost. So that's a really good point that you bring up. Now, I want to touch on also, because obviously I think it matters who you choose as your inspector. I mean, just like with anything, there's got to be all kinds of cozy relationships that inspectors have. I mean, for most sellers, for Chris and I, our suppliers are exactly halfway across the planet Earth. I mean, it's impossible for us to get in there. We don't know what's going on day to day. So is there is fraud, bribery, is all that rampant in that industry, or is there, just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's really hard to tell because a lot of people have this misconception that fraud and bribery is like the zero-sum game. So the inspector goes to the factory, they get paid $25, and then they pass an order, for example. That's actually not how it works. So a lot of times an inspector may not even take a bribe and might pass a defective order, just by not paying attention, not doing a good job, not really caring about your products. But also in the sense that, when an inspector goes to the factory, like think about it this way, they're still human at the end of the day. So if they go to the factory and they're like, okay, hey, the factory rep is super, super nice. Like I'll actually give you an example from my real life. So I actually went to a foot doctor here in Chesterton. That's my hometown. And it's in Indiana. So it's a suburb of Chicago. So I went to my foot doctor here locally. And I talked with him. I met him for the first time, and I have some flat feet, so I was having some shin pain. I thought I might need some orthotics. So I met with him, and we had a really good conversation. He liked me, I liked him, and it was a really solid conversation. And after that, he basically said, okay, hey, Sajag, you know what you need? You need a pair of orthotics. And he went to the back, got me a $50 pair of orthotics, came back and said, hey, try these on. So I went ahead, tried them on, and I was like, oh, these fit well. He's like, awesome. I want you to have these for free. Yeah, I'm not going to charge you for that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, thanks. And then like 5 minutes later, he showed in with a nurse, and he's like, okay, hey, Sajag, I'm going to need you to follow this nurse out because they don't like me giving away shit for free. And I was like, he works for this $1 billion hospital group. So I was like, hey, this like just orthotics is $50, like no problem. I'll pay for it. It's fine. But then he was like, no, I insist. You're not going to leave here without taking them for free. So I took them and I left. But, that's like kind of the same thing. His mentality was, what's an extra few dollars to this $1 billion company? That's the same thing that can happen when you're doing an inspection. So when the inspector goes to the factory, the inspector rep treats them super nicely, buys them lunch, helps them with the inspection. At the end of the inspection, they're saying, hey, inspector, I know this order is going to fail by 5%. But if you don't pass this order, I'm going to lose my job. And the inspector might think, okay, hey, on this side here, we have this $1 billion organization, American company, whatever. What's an extra few dollars and a few defective units to them? This guy here is going to lose their job. So I'm going to help this guy out. And I'm just going to maybe take a bribe, or I'm going to do whatever. And it doesn't mean necessarily I'm going to pass the inspection. It could be instead of having 30 defects, I report 20 defects, which is still a fail, but it only fails by very little to the point that, you'll still kind of pass. So that's really what happens with fraud and bribery. It's not like a cut and dry thing, which makes it really difficult to kind of track and figure it out. So there's a lot of different ways you can tackle that. But what we've seen actually work out the best is actually humanizing the whole inspection process. So when it comes to, for example, inspectors, they think, the companies that they're working for are these huge American foreign companies, tons of money, Americans, they just have that, name to it, all around the world. You're like, oh, you're American, you're rich. That's kind of like the connotation you have. So we always try to give it to the inspectors at a holistic perspective and tell them, hey, the companies you're working with, some of them are doing hundreds of millions in sales, but also a lot of them are on the other end of the spectrum, and they're just individuals starting their business. And when you're an individual starting your business, you borrowed all this money from your friends, your family, your parents, and you maxed out your credit cards, maybe sold your house. When you pass a defective order, even if it's by 1 or 2%, that's enough to just completely hit that threshold where it's not it can't be sold on Amazon, buyer rejects it, and you're not impacting $1 billion company that's losing a few extra dollars. You're impacting an individual just like yourself that can lose the food on their table. And that's what's paying for their food, for their kids, for their wife, for their husbands, whatever it might be. That's what's putting food on the table, and you're directly responsible for that. They're trusting you to be their last line of defense. So humanizing that inspection process, giving inspectors the bigger vision, and then also enabling them to do a good job. Like, for example, with my inspection company that I was working with in that one story I mentioned, they gave the inspector 8 hours to do what should have taken them maybe 12 hours. And if the inspector goes to the factory, they're like, yeah, management gave me 8 hours to do this 12-hour inspection. I don't have enough time. They clearly don't care if I do a good job. Then why should I care if I do a good job? Then it kind of just, cascades down, and your inspectors end up not caring about your products, taking bribes or committing fraud even without bribes. And that's what ends up happening when it comes to fraud and bribery.
Man, that's good stuff. So something I've learned when working with suppliers is like being upfront with them in the negotiation process, like saying, I'm going to do an inspection. It's going to happen. Like I have standards that need to be met. And the term I hear a lot is AQL. Mm-hmm. What's a good example of like a good AQL? And what does that mean? Are you doing those at the port? Are you doing your inspection at the port? Are you doing it at the factory? When I was negotiating, I would put that in like the notes section and say, these are my AQL standards that we need to hit. And then they would know, okay, this guy's, serious. He's playing hardball. He's going to have somebody come out and inspect the units, and they got to hit these standards. For new sellers, they may not know to include this in their negotiation. What do you suggest there for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So to first of all answer your first question, which was whether you want to do it at the port or factory, that's a really, really interesting question. And a lot of people actually don't ask this. So this is a really fantastic question because we do inspections, for example, on Movley at the factory, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that a couple of things. So first of all, when you do an inspection at the port, you've already paid your final payment to your supplier. So you've kind of lost your leverage at that point. So if you find defects, you have to ship it back to your supplier, negotiate with them. They essentially have the leverage at that point, and they're just kind of doing you a favor because you've already bought the goods. And the second problem is that if you have machines, you want to test the product, you want a good, you want to have a good inspection on it. A lot of the times you're using the factory's machinery to actually test the products. The factory's weighing machines, the factory's product machines. Like, for example, when we were manufacturing cables, for example, in China, they had bend test machines, which were like automatic wear and tear tests that you can do through a machine on the product. So all those machines are at the factory, and the inspector can use them. But if you're at the port, you can't do that anymore. And what ends up happening is all the inspection companies that are inspecting at the port, they're in reality freight forwarding companies. That's usually what they are. And they don't really understand how to properly do inspections, how to make them statistically significant, which lowers your cost and also increases the effectivity. And also at the same time, they have an incentive to make sure the products pass, because if they don't, they're going to lose that volume that they booked on that freight next week out. So, that's what ends up happening. So that's in regards to port and factory. And then in terms of AQL, that's also a really awesome question. So with AQL, I would say that, so there's kind of 3 levels. So AQL runs off a spec called ISO 2859, and that's essentially a statistical model. So the statistical model basically lays out how many units should I inspect in an inspection while still being statistically significant. So we have 3 levels to that: level 1, level 2, level 3. And level 2 actually is what generally is recommended if you're selling at Walmart or Target, you're selling to brick and mortar, they'll ask you for a level 2 inspection report often. Level 3 inspection report is when level 3 is kind of the highest tier in that model. And that's really what we recommend for Amazon sellers, just because you have a higher risk of fraud, higher risk of quality control problems, higher risk of returns, 4x returns on Amazon versus a brick and mortar. So we always recommend doing at least level 3 as a little bit of a risk mitigation. So like in 1,000 units, level 3 is about 125 units. And in terms of AQL, so AQL is a part of that standard called acceptable quality limits. And essentially, it lays out what is the number of units that you can allow that are defective while still passing the inspection. And there's 3 types of defects. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information. So
keep going.
Slow down. Just let me know. But yeah, with AQL, it's there's a setup, and there's 3 types of defects in an AQL that at least most inspection companies use, including us, which is critical, major, and minor. Now, minor defects are things that are, very controlled, small scratches, things like that. Your customers are not like super happy it's there, but like they probably don't really care. But so that's more of a minor defect. Major defect is something that, okay, customers, when they see this kind of problem, they're not going to be happy. They're probably going to return the product. So it's something that you want highly controlled, but still allowable, because not everybody's going to return the product. But this is something that would make you consider returning the product, and it might get you a 4-star review instead of a 5-star review, or at lowest a 3-star review. A critical defect is something that it cannot be sold at all. Like, this is a guaranteed return. This is like a broken product. This product does not function. There's a clear problem with this product, especially for higher priced products. If you have any sort of functional issue, that's a critical defect. And generally, critical defects are not allowed at all on the inspection. So if they find even one critical defect in the sample size, the whole inspection fails. So you can essentially set up what the tier is. So telling your factory in advance, hey, we're going to use, to this AQL, the factory can't really do that information unless they know what is the classifications on the AQL. Like, what do you consider a major defect? What do you consider a minor defect? What do you consider a critical defect? Because if you're selling a home and you consider flimsiness, not a defect, but in a, wooden comb, if it's flimsy, that's a little bit of a problem. You can't sell that product. So that might be a critical defect for you. Then the factory will get, 2 different, perspectives. So it's really important to kind of classify to the factory that, hey, this is what I consider, the defect tiers, and this is what I consider a defect in each tier. And we're going to be looking out for this. But you also have to be super careful, because oftentimes when you're testing and doing inspections, you're testing symptoms. You're not testing the root cause. So for example, if the machine is loosely calibrated for knitting and you're having a knitted product, there's a lot of loose threads. Then if they cut off all the threads because you're looking for loose threads, then you don't know the machine didn't properly, put together the product unless you actually monitor the production. So there's a little bit of a distinction there, which can make it a little bit more complex.
So if I order samples, if I'm getting a sample of a product and I love the sample, if I just said that the finished product has to be exactly like the sample, is that an easy way to get just to say, like, if it doesn't fit the sample, then we're not taking it? Or do I have to, specifically say this is what needs to happen when I negotiate? Or can I say that, the final product has to meet exactly the same standards as the sample?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So a lot of times factories will send like the best samples. And let's say you're doing a shelf, and the shelf might have a weight limit of 150 pounds. But if you didn't discuss that specification with your factory, then they might create a product that looks exactly the same and it looks just like the sample, but maybe the weight limit's 80 pounds instead of 150 pounds. So it's really important to kind of understand the specs in advance and just kind of keep that in writing. And that can also help you limit, your quality issues, or your, what kind of quality differences there's going to be in the product if you start negotiating the price. So what I always recommend doing is talking with the supplier and asking them, okay, what are the specifications you use to gauge this product? Like, what are the specs you use internally for this product versus other products? And how do you structure the manufacturing for this to meet those specs? And ask that in the sales process when they want to sell you. And when you ask those same questions to other factories as well, then you have 20 different factories. Even if your first factory or your first 10 factories are not totally transparent on the specifications they use, the other 10 factories might be transparent. So you can eventually aggregate all those specifications from all these different factories, and then at least know, hey, these are the specs that I should be looking for. And then talk with your supplier regarding that. Can you tell me the specs for this product in regards to all these categories?
That's good. That's helpful.
this is why I love having experts on the show.
I know, right?
We learn something every single time we have someone, and I mean, you're just giving us a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I think for a lot of people, I mean, myself included to some degree, the inspections that we expect or we think of in the past. I mean, I've had inspections where I just get a bunch of pictures and some videos of them walking around the factory and showing me. So basically, I'm verifying that the packaging looks right. It's essentially, and that it's in the correct boxes. That's the scope of my inspection. Just hearing you talk about criteria, and I mean, a lot of ways don't think about this often, but I mean, if you have something that's stretchy, how is it the same stretchiness? Does it snap at a certain poundage? If that's, I can see where you're coming at, where if that's not quantified up front, then you lose your recourse. Like if you say this can't snap for up to 20 pounds of tension, that would be a critical flaw where the whole thing is void. This is interesting. I've actually never been that detailed in my inspections, and I will for sure be starting, because that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, it's so fun to learn stuff like that. So going on now is a couple of things. Do you need to get an inspection every single order? Is there any reason why do you need to continue to get inspections every time you make an order? And then what do you do when an inspection fails? What happens at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. Just to go back on your first point real quick there, I just wanted to mention, because a lot of people, when I mention, get into the details, get into the specs, they get super overwhelmed. And all I want to say is that it's not as hard as it might look. Just talk with the factories. You don't have to go about and do your own research and become an engineer in your products. Just ask other factories that are producing similar products and ask them what specifications they use to gauge their product. So let the factories do the work for you, and then just add it all up. So it's super easy. So that's what I would always recommend there. But then to answer your next questions, could you just repeat those questions real quick?
Yeah, no, it's good. Just touching on what happens when an inspection fails, and before that is, should you do an inspection every single time you make an order?
Got it. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. So when an inspection fails, the first thing you want to do is talk with your suppliers and just tell them, hey, we're not happy with the inspection quality. So there's actually two types of inspections. There's a during production inspection, and there's a pre-shipment inspection. Those are the two most common types of inspections. The pre-shipment inspection is done at 100%. So you've already produced all the products. So if there's something wrong and it's something widespread, like the wrong color or something like that, then a lot of the products might have to be reproduced. So the during production inspection is really helpful, especially on first orders. You can do those as you need, essentially, and that goes in at about 20% of production completion. And you also get some documentation on the production line, which is a little bit of a benchmark in production. So you can benchmark it to other orders. But if you do a during production inspection, essentially that'll help you gauge, like, okay, hey, there's problems here. And you can tell the factory before they produce all the products that, hey, these problems need to be fixed on the other 80% of production. So those can be really helpful. But like, let's say you get it at a pre-shipment inspection, you find some problems. Addressing it with your supplier is really the best way to go. If they're really severe problems, they're really widespread, and it's kind of a gray area, like no one can really take fault at it. Maybe there was a miscommunication or something like that. Then you might have to end up splitting some costs to repair those products. And I would recommend being amicable about that, especially when you want to build a long-term relationship with the supplier. If you want them to value you, you have to also kind of value them, that, hey, they put money into this product. They're going to lose money on this order. So maybe we can, if it's $1,000 to repair the product, maybe we'll split the product cost 50-50. Like I pay 500, you pay 500. But let's get these products fixed, and we want to work with you, kind of thing. So that might be really good. But either way, you're going to probably end up spending a little bit more time as the factory fixes those problems, if you find problems after all the products are produced. But most factories are pretty amicable if they want to work with you long term, so they'll fix the problems. But I would recommend having some flexibility there on the price, because a lot of factories may not agree unless you contribute a little bit.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about Movley. You've created this company. There's a lot of inspection companies, right? So there's a lot of other people doing this. You get in any Facebook group, somebody's going to hit you up and say they can do, inspection and negotiation. I mean, it just happens.
Right.
What makes you guys different? I mean, I can hear the passion in the voice. I'm pretty sure it's clear, but What makes you guys different than any other inspection service that I'm going to be able to contact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it comes down to a lot of areas. So one area that I really want to highlight is that, first of all, before I start, Movley is not going to be a perfect inspections company. So just like every other inspections companies, we have our pros, we have our cons, and we have our flaws. But that said, what we do differently, we try to be about 2 to 3 times more effective right now than the next best competitor, just with our processes and the way we do things. And we're actually working on building out tech to get to that 10x level. So we're actually working to build out a tech platform where you can get real-time data insights as your inspector is on the factory ground, get data analytics on the inspector so you can see which ones are passing more inspections, which ones are failing more inspections, how good of an inspection they do. And we're also working on potentially getting body camera footage to actually lower our auditing costs, so you can get that and sync it up so you can see each part of the inspection as like a little clip all spliced up for you in our portal. So we're working on a lot of tech to get to that 10x level. Right now, we're not going to be perfect, as I mentioned, but I would say we are about 2 to 3 times more effective than the next best competitor. So what we do differently in our inspection reports is one of the biggest impact areas is kind of what I was mentioning earlier with fraud and bribery. We really try to humanize that whole inspection process. So we're actually the only inspection company that actually calculates the time for the inspection on the basis of exactly how much you want done. So depending on the number of units and also depending on the number of tests. What most inspection companies do is they just look at, hey, you have 200 units you want to do today. Okay, you want to do all these tests on 200 units. All right, still 1 day, because they base it on the number of units. We actually base our times on the number of tests, the number of units, things like that, in the average basis. And we're always improving that. So that's one of the biggest things that we do differently is we make sure our inspectors have enough time to do their inspection, and then we humanize the process, and we use tech to actually streamline it to audit them and improve the function, like our data analytics and things like that. Also, one of the biggest things with Movley is our back office is actually in the Philippines. So we're the only company for inspections that actually has a back office there. And what's super awesome about that is that it's about 6 times cheaper than working with a back office in China. And we're also able to speak native English. So when you work with us, we can actually make sure that, okay, hey, you tell us XYZ, we understand XYZ, we understand your slang. And it also allows us to give you more service for the same price. So we're actually able to look at your booking documents before every inspection, give you suggestions, feedback, ask you questions, and then make sure your inspection was done properly. Because when that one bad order comes, everything that, that's where you want to get those inspections. So that's our job. And with reporting, we also improve that. So we're working on that tech platform. We're always working on innovations there. But all of our reports are 40 pages standard. We always include hundreds of photos. We include videos of each test, instruction, product overview videos, and just in general, a lot more detailed information. So one of the things we also do standard with every inspection is actually a factory overview report. It's not like a factory audit where it's like 50 pages on a deep dive in the factory, but it's like 1 or 2 pages just so you can keep a pulse on your factory between inspections. So we look at employee count breakdown by department. We look at the business license. So you can kind of see between, my first order, between my second order, did the factory grow by 30%? Did they shrink by 30%? Do I need to do another audit? So we do that standard with every inspection because it takes the inspector 15, 20 minutes. And it really helps you understand, what's going on in your factory. With an inspection, you're going to do either way. So you don't have to go and do a factory audit every few months.
That's amazing. I mean, I love just what you talked about, where you are and what the steps you're taking to really go above and beyond to make sure the inspection is done properly. And then just what you mentioned about the future. I mean, the idea of having a body cam on somebody while they're doing it. I mean, because really the whole point is we're just trying to improve the transparency between what we're getting because we're not there. So you have to have someone that's hopefully as invested in you as you are in what's coming. So it's amazing. I love what you've set up. I think the integration with tech, that's really cool. What you guys are doing there. So in your terms, so the average cost probably was like $300 a day, something like that for an inspection. Well, you can get them. There's like Chris talked about, there's lots of companies out there that offer cheaper. I mean, what corners are they cutting to get the price down like that? And I mean, is that risky to take that cheaper one like that?
Yeah, definitely. I can speak a lot on that because I went that same route in my experience as well. But I always like to say, because a lot of people don't believe me when I say this because they're like, oh, you're from Movley. you're a little biased. I agree, but take a look at Alibaba Inspection Services. And they probably hate me right now because I shit on them quite a bit. But they just go on their website and check out the table they have on their website. And they literally say, okay, our inspection is like $100, $200, $250. And they'll say, we'll do a workmanship check, which is the same thing as a visual check. We're just going to look at your products. They look good, therefore they pass, which is not enough. And then for product function test, product conformity test, they'll only test between 1 to 3 units. And that's like the max they go. So if you have like a product like a paper cup, you want to make sure all your paper cups are good. They don't leak. They don't have holes in them. You want to pour water in each cup real quick. They're only going to check 3 cups to make sure that they work. So if you have a 20% defect rate, every time they pick a unit, you have an 80% chance essentially of picking a good unit. So essentially almost an 80% chance of your inspection passing with no defects with a 20% defect rate. So it just makes absolutely no sense. So one of the things that cut rate companies do is they, first of all, don't actually check all the units for function, all the units for product conformity. We have that in our booking form where we actually allow you to specify exactly how many units you want to test. And we actually do that because we account for the time to do those tests. And even other inspection companies that cut rate ones, they make their money actually doing 2 to 3 inspections in the same day. And each inspection is essentially an hour to 2 hours long because there has to also be transport between the 2 factories. So if you tell them, hey, we need to do this inspection, even on 200 units or 100 units, doing that inspection in a 2 to 3 hours is just not possible. You can't even visually just check the products and make sure they're good unless you're just speeding through it. And when you're putting the inspector under that much pressure, putting them under some extreme time limits and time quotas, they just can't do a good job and they don't care about your products. And that makes a huge impact. So a lot of people have this misconception that inspector labor in China costs maybe $3 to $5 an hour. And that's really not the case. It costs about $13 to $19 an hour for the inspector's time after benefits for a well-trained bilingual inspector. And then you also have to consider travel costs to the factory. So you're already spending about $100, $150 on the inspector labor. Then you have to consider travel costs. You have to consider administrative costs. You have to consider training costs, fraud and bribery auditing costs, accommodations, things like that. And then obviously a margin for the inspection company. So when you factor in all those costs, it's pretty transparent and pretty clear. It's just simply not possible to do an inspection that's good in that little amount of money, anything under like $300. It's just almost impossible to do an inspection and do that consistently. So that's really where it comes down to. It's just straight up margins and quotas. And, it's like Wells Fargo. You put a very extreme quota on the inspectors, the work will still get done and people will just turn a blind eye to it. Like, all these accounts are being opened, whatever. But at the end of the day, the results are not what you're expecting.
Yeah, you've covered a lot. This has really been good. We're going to have you back on, especially next year as 2021 comes around. I'm sure things are going to change, with the trade wars and COVID and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure that things are going to change. So we're definitely going to have you back on. In closing, I want to talk about like a good tip or a good hey, I'm a new seller. I like we're new sellers. What would you give us as a suggestion? Like, I'm sourcing a product now. What would be your advice?
Yeah. So if you're sourcing a product, I think if you're in that stage, like you're just getting started, you've not like actually even placed an order, my suggestion would be build a good relationship with your factory. So I feel like a lot of people look at it too transactionally, like, hey, we need a supplier, we need our products, build the products, here's the money, take it, give us products. And that's true. But in China, especially, and even in other countries, supply chain in general as an industry is very relationship based. So take some extra time to invest and build a relationship with your factories and do that from the start. Think of them as a partner to your company and not so much as just an expense or as a supplier. So like when you're actually going out and talking with your suppliers, you're meeting with your suppliers. One of the things that, when I was in China, they would do all the time, and same thing we started doing as well, is when we go talk to a new supplier on that first meeting, we have a PowerPoint deck that we actually put together. It talks about our brand. We have the brand logo, how we started, who's the founders. We give them a presentation like they're partnering with us. Hey, this is who we are. This is who you're working with. This is what we do. These are the products we're making. This is where we're going. And we're looking for awesome suppliers to join on our journey. And we want to work with you. So that's why we're having this conversation. So giving them an introduction to who you are, who the factory is, not like an interview, but, not like you're going for a job interview, but, you're going for like a partnership kind of thing, giving them a holistic perspective of who you are. that goes a far and a long way, because then they understand, okay, hey, your brand is all about quality products. If we give you cheap products, you're not going to be able to sell this, right? So if your brand is about selling to customers who are using these, let's say you're doing outdoor backpacks. These people are using their outdoor backpacks to go hiking. These are not just regular outdoor backpacks. Look at where the people are using it. These are the reviews for the products, right? We can't go give you a crap quality backpack that's going to break apart while someone's climbing a mountain with it, right? So when you create that introduction, you give them that holistic perspective, it sets that relationship off on the right foot, and it'll impact your sample quality, it'll impact your relationship, and they'll also take you much more seriously, because they're like, okay, hey, you recognize how we look at things, and we want to give you a good experience, and you really want to work with us to build a brand. So they understand that you have that perspective as well, and that will really double down on your relationship.
I think that's a great tip, because a lot of sellers do look at that as like a transaction. If you work with a supplier long enough, you're going to find out like they're going to send you gifts. Like I've had suppliers send me gifts for the holidays, and if you just create a relationship with them, you're going to get more out of it. It's going to be better for both of you. So that's a great tip.
Yeah. And I'll touch on a little bit more, because I think that it's so important what you brought up. I mean, I've had suppliers who've flown out and visited me in the States, and they're sending, like Chris talking about, we're emailing back family pictures, and they really like that relationship. And once you develop that relationship, just like any relationship, but once you develop it, stuff starts happening a lot quicker. You get you're at the top of the list when your email comes in, for sure.
You get first dibs on new product.
Yeah, exactly. They send you the new products their factory's designing. I mean, yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, just to touch on it even further, like with what all the things that you described are making me rethink, just to enhance that relationship, having all this stuff up front, like what you're expecting from the product, and have it really laid out, will just solve a lot of potential problems. Because they could, like you said, it's not necessarily intentional that they are giving you a inferior quality product. They may not have known that you're expecting something better if it's not laid out.
Yeah. And I want to double down on that real quick with what you were saying. It's extremely important to set expectations up front and then follow through on them. Like, for example, if you're going to do inspections on every order, which you should be doing, like, obviously I'm biased, but every Fortune company does it. Every major manufacturer does it. If you're doing inspections on every order, you don't want to work with a supplier for like a year and build this relationship, share family photos, and then say, hey, we don't trust you, start doing inspections. That's something you want to do from day one. And that's what you want to build in. So you want to say, hey, we know what we're doing. We have a process. We also want to build we want to build a relationship with you, but we also want to follow our process, and create that standard and set that standard in advance, so they understand what's expected of them from day one. So you're not just throwing at it and stressing the relationship after a few months or a few years of working with them. So, start as early as you can and set those expectations and say, hey, we're expecting to do this. Our investors are asking for this. Our insurance company's asking for this, whatever. We need to make sure that we get proper processes in place, and think about it on a relationship perspective, not just a transactional perspective. Exactly.
That's great.
Yep. Perfect stuff. I mean, I think that's a good mic drop right there.
So going on from that, let's say we're sellers out there. We'll be contacting you shortly. Don't worry, ourselves, Chris and I. But for all the people listening, they're in the process right now of getting products, and they're talking to their suppliers. How do they reach out to you? What are the steps to work with Movley and work with you on getting the inspections?
Yeah, definitely. So you can always visit us at movley.com, Movley.com. And we have some awesome resources there. We're building them up every day. And we also have a get started form. So whenever you guys are ready to book inspections, or you're about to place your order, et cetera, you start having some questions relating to that, you can book an intro call with us. And it's about 15, 20-minute call. We'll answer any of your questions on inspections, get you all set up and ready to go. And then connect you with our bookings team. So whenever you're ready to book inspections, you can just email them and they'll take care of it.
Guys, go call them. Go call them. You're going to get more info than you need, but it's going to be helpful.
Yeah, we're sold on your passion and just your story, and just the pride you take in what you guys are doing. with those inspections. I know it's going to be a major help. It's going to save people a lot of money and a lot of headache down the road if they do it. So everyone listening, go to Movley.com, get set up, start working with them on your inspections. And we can't thank you enough for coming on this show. It's been an absolute blast. And so anyway, just real quick, some housekeeping notes for everyone out there that's listening. If you like this content, you love what we're doing, we love what we're doing. We like our own content. We're learning stuff every day. So we like it. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe to us on the podcast. Leave us a review, rating if you think it's good. Also, we go live every time we do our podcast. We're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So go to the Solozo page on either of those platforms. Like the page, you'll get notifications when we go live. So you can get great content like this. We learned so much. Sajag, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fantastic.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. And I hope everybody listening found this really valuable.
Oh, they better.
For sure. For sure. We'll see everybody on the next one. Have a good day.
See ya.